So, I guess recommending books on the internet is a thing I do now. As I thought about what genre I would choose for this video, I went back and forth between several, but finally I decided to settle on books written about or set in my home state of Louisiana. Full disclosure, I was neither born nor raised in Louisiana, but my father was. And since my mother was an only child, my experience of family was always focused more on Louisiana than Mississippi, the state in which I was actually raised. I went to college in Louisiana, and for the past 27 years, over half my life, I've made Louisiana my home. I love the Mississippi Gulf Coast where I was raised, but I've always felt like a Louisianian. Perhaps because the coast is the most Louisiana-ish part of Mississippi. I met a man from Tupelo once, and I told him I was also from Mississippi. He asked me where I was from, and I said, Ocean Springs. He narrowed his eyes and said, Isn't that on the coast? I confirmed it was. You ain't from Mississippi. You're from Louisiana. He thought he had insulted me. So, here's my list of my favorite books set in or about Louisiana. Some are classics, some are not. Some are part of a series, some are not. Some are fiction, most. Some are nonfiction. And as always, it's in no particular order. Number 1. A Confederacy of Dunces by John Kennedy Toole. I think anyone moving into the greater New Orleans area should be issued a pound of Union brand coffee. It will tickle your taste buds. A case of Abita beer, and a copy of this book. I don't think any book captures the essence of a city the way Confederacy of Dunces captures New Orleans. Ignatius P. Riley, Myrna Minks, Officer Mancuso, Burma Jones, and all the denizens of the Night of Joy and the Levy Pants Corporation swirl around the city and its environs with hilarious consequences. It's sad that a voice as unique as Toole's has been silenced. But as he committed suicide 11 years before the book was even published, and his only other book that he ever completed was the Neon Bible, which was actually written years before. And while it's beautiful in its own right, it's nothing like this one. Confederacy of Dunces would not have ever even been published were it not for the tenacity of his mother, who convinced the person who wrote the next book on this list to read it. Number 2, The Moviegoer by Walker Percy. Walker Percy is the reason that Confederacy of Dunces was published, and we should thank him for that if for nothing else. But that is by no means the most important of his accomplishments. I first read The Moviegoer in college. I attended St. Joseph's Seminary College near Covington, Louisiana, and was at the time considering a vocation to the priesthood. Like nearly everyone else at the college, I was majoring in philosophy as a preparation to study theology. The Moviegoer was suggested to me as an example of the important themes of existential philosophy. Binks Bowling, who moves through his life like a spectator who is stuck in a malaise, is the protagonist of the novel. He has a comfortable life and has prospects, but he's not happy, but he doesn't know exactly why. He combats the malaise with frequent love affairs and by going to the movies. The work is set in New Orleans, but it is less the centerpiece of the story than for Confederacy, with the exception that it takes place the day before Mardi Gras and ends on Ash Wednesday. That it happens during the culmination of Carnival is appropriate, as Binks does indeed say farewell to flesh after his own fashion. It was not until I finished the book, or nearly finished it, that I was told that Percy was a frequent visitor to the abbey where I was studying. I actually saw him several times, but I never had the guts to approach him. I regret that. He died the day I cleaned out my dorm room after graduating. Three, Jitterbug Perfume by Tom Robbins. I read Jitterbug Perfume the summer after I graduated from college. I had decided not to pursue the priesthood, and I was reveling in being as bohemian as a guy living in Biloxi, Mississippi, and teaching religion at his old Catholic high school could be. I stayed up late, drank lots of coffee, hung around with my theater friends, and found love for the first time. My girlfriend at the time was, and truth told is, much cooler than I ever was or will be. And she loved Tom Robbins. Still Life with Woodpecker, Skinny Legs and All, even Cowgirls Get the Blues, and this book were all suggested to me by her. Our relationship didn't have a future, but I'm grateful to her for turning me on to Tom Robbins. The story is a magical journey that covers over 1,000 years and concerns the search for immortality, love, perfume, and the value of beets. It ranges literally all over the world, but the parts that take place in Louisiana are electric. It's obvious that Robbins had spent time here. Here are a couple quotes to illustrate. Louisiana in September was like an obscene phone call from nature. The air moist, sultry, secretive, and far from fresh. It felt as if it were being exhaled into one's face. Sometimes it even sounded like heavy breathing. And if New Orleans is not fully in the mainstream of culture, neither is it fully in the mainstream of time. Lacking a well-defined present, it lives somewhere between its past and its future, as if uncertain whether to advance or retreat. Perhaps it is its perpetual ambivalence that is the secret of its charm. Somewhere between Preservation Hall and the Superdome, between voodoo and cybernetics, New Orleans listens eagerly to the seductive promise of the future, but keeps at least one foot firmly planted in its history. And in the end, conforms like an artist, not to the world, but to its own inner being, ever mindful of its personal style. This guy has definitely been here. Number 4. Interview with the Vampire by Anne Rice. What really needs to be said about this series? Anne Rice reinvented the vampire story with this series, and her hometown of New Orleans was front and center as it was in so many of her books. Surely you've read this one already, right? Number 5. A Gathering of Old Men by Ernest J. Gaines. This is one of the books that could have easily been on my first list of classics that you may have been assigned in school. In fact, I taught this book to sophomores at Catholic High School many years ago. This book takes place on a sugarcane farm here in Louisiana, and it is a powerful story about racism, loyalty, and justice. Number 6. Dead Until Dark by Charlaine Harris. Well, actually the entire Sookie Stackhouse series, not just Dead Until Dark. Before HBO turned it into True Blood, this series was known as either the Southern Vampire series or the Sookie Stackhouse Mysteries. They are essentially mystery stories. Sookie is very much the amateur detective in the books, and there are just also, vampires. It's set in the fictional Louisiana town of Bonton. How is there not an actual Louisiana town called Bonton? We should get on that. Anyway, Sookie meets and often sleeps with vampires, werewolves, fairies, and about every other kind of supernatural creature you can think of. My wife and I love the series so much we named our bloodhound Sookie. Rest in peace, Sookie girl. Oh, and in case you're wondering, hashtag Team Eric all the way. Number 7. My Life as a White Trash Zombie by Diana Rowland. Actually, the entire White Trash Zombie series. Is anyone else here just a little disappointed that this pandemic has been so far devoid of zombies? If so, try this. This is the 3rd series on this list, and the only one whose author is a Facebook friend. Diana Rowland lives just one town over from me, and is basically one of the coolest people in St. Tammany Parish. If you can get the Washington Post to do a story on your Christmas dragons and your fight with your neighbors over them, you're clearly one up on most people around you. This series is perhaps the most fun one on this list as well. Angel Crawford is your average drug-addled high school dropout petty criminal until being bitten by a benevolent zombie who turns her into a crime-solving morgue technician with zombie superpowers and a taste for brains. All this is set in a Louisiana that can only be written by someone who knows and loves it. This series is hilarious, and I love it. Number 8. The Awakening by Kate Chopin. This is another book that could have been on my classics list. Kate Chopin was a woman ahead of her time. She was writing frank accounts of women as people with agency and desire unconnected from men long before the term feminist had even been coined. Edna Pontier is a strong, if tragic, example of a woman who tries against all the convention of her time to take control of her own happiness. That this takes place not only in New Orleans, but the entire Gulf Coast I love so much, is an added bonus. Number 9, All the King's Men by Robert Penn Warren. There's an old expression, to cast a long shadow. It means your presence is felt long after you are gone. Long shadow is particularly apt here in Louisiana, where the Long family has been a part of the political landscape for literally an entire century. Huey Long is the nexus point for that activity, and his name is literally on everything from hospitals and bridges to this day. As governor of Louisiana, he may have claimed that every man could be a king, but everyone knew who the kingfish was. His rise and fall is still the topic of conversation. I recall a lively conversation in a cigar store when I lived in Baton Rouge as to whether Carl Weiss actually did or even could have killed Huey that day. All the King's Men is a fictionalized account of Huey Long. Billy Stark is not always an exact copy of Huey, but anyone from Louisiana recognizes him with little difficulty. I had the opportunity to direct a stage version of this book for Playmakers Theater here in Covington a while back. I would put the actors I cast in the two leads, Willie and Jack, against anybody. Robert and Gordon, you both rock. Number 10, Dead Man Walking by Sister Helen Prejean. These next 3 books are all nonfiction. I include them here because they fit the conceit of the video and because in their own way each had a profound effect on me. None more profound than Dead Man Walking. Sister Helen Prejean's unblinking look at the death penalty in my home state grabbed me from the beginning. I can't say that it changed my point of view because I was an opponent of capital punishment long before I read it. But it did give me new resolve. I taught this book at Catholic High in the 1990s, and thanks to her connections with our sister school, St. Joseph Academy, our department was even able to get her to come and speak to the school. I've been lucky to meet her several times, and my autographed copy of this book is a special treasure. Number 11, Black Like Me by John Howard Griffin. I'm not sure a book about a white man who shaves his head and darkens his skin to pass as a black man would fly in today's world. But Griffin's story of how he traveled in the Jim Crow South, particularly in New Orleans, disguised as an African American, had an effect on my view of race and justice as a young teenager that is rivaled only by the effect watching Roots had had on me nearly a decade earlier. If you can never know a person until you walk a mile in his shoes, Griffin did it in his skin. Number 12, Socks on a Rooster, Louisiana's Earl K. Long by Richard B. McCaughan. Honestly, I almost didn't include this book because it's out of print. It can be found on Amazon, however, so here it is. If Huey Long is the father of modern Louisiana, then it makes sense that his brother Earl's nickname would be Uncle Earl. And like many uncles, he's just a lot crazy. I first read this book in the mid-1990s, mostly because the library at Catholic High School where I was teaching had a copy. The title intrigued me, and I had liked the movie Blaze, starring Paul Newman, that had come out about 5 years before. I wanted to see if Uncle Earl was as unique as he appeared in the movie. If anything, Newman toned him down. Huey may throw a long shadow, but his brother Earl was a whole other level of out there. This book didn't disappoint. Like with Huey, I was lucky enough to have met people who met him. The history of the Long family in Louisiana is not forgotten history for us. People still talk about Huey and Uncle Earl as if they were friends they just saw at Rouse's. This book gave me great insight into that reality. So, here's another list. I hope those of you who are bothering to watch them enjoy them, and I certainly have fun making them. If you decide to try one of the books I recommend, I do hope you enjoy it. Stay safe, wash your hands, and read a book.